This podcast is sponsored by the newsletter Pitch Club, the monthly Substack where you read cold pitches and hear the authors audio annotating their thinking behind how they sold and crafted their pitches. How to pitch an agent, an editor, a feature to an editor, an essay to an editor, or a source. I think that's going to be really cool when I get into those pitches. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com, forever free. Read a little, listen a little. I guarantee you're going to learn a lot.
I'm no fun. I want to be fun. I want people to think that I'm fun. I think I'm fun, but I don't write about fun stuff.
OACNF is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. I'm your sour soy milk in the back of the fridge, Brendan O'Meara. It's still good. It's still good. All right, we've got Howard Bryant back on the show for episode 509. Oh, my God. End of introduction. If you don't know Howard, then frankly, I don't care to know you. Have I thanked you for listening to the podcast lately? You have a lot of options out there, and whether you listen to this show at 1x, 1.5x, 2x, for 10 minutes or 70 minutes a week, I'm deeply grateful you've chosen to hang out for a bit and maybe get a little bit better. Feel a little less lonely. Feel a little less crummy. Maybe. Howard is the best-selling author of several books, and his latest is Kings and Pawns, Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson in America. It's published by Mariner Books. Hey, I know those guys. Very sexy. Call me. Howard's book takes a new framing on two iconic Black American icons, let's get redundant here, of the 20th century. Very few people know much about Paul Robeson, certainly not me, who was a brilliant football player, but perhaps more famous as a baritone singer and stage actor. Jackie Robinson was the first Black American to play Major League Baseball, breaking the color barrier in baseball. And it's all been rainbows and sunshine ever since. The two were separated by some 20 years. They never met in person, but were pitted against each other during the Second Red Scare. Kings turned into pawns. The authoritarian McCarthyian overreach of the era very much echoes our current moment. Robeson's career, his life, was ruined. It's a complicated story, brilliantly orchestrated by one of the best writers this country has to offer, in Howard Bryant. Show notes to this episode and more at BrendanO'Meara.com. Hey, where you can read blog posts and sign up for Pitch Club. The show can also be found on Instagram, at Creative Nonfiction Podcast. If you want to help the show, you can sign up to be a patron at patreon.com/CNFpod. Any paid tier gets access to the Flash 52 sessions, 52 weeks of writing Flash essays in community. Been fun so far. I've been really enjoying it. If you don't want to part with your beer money, leaving kind ratings and reviews for the podcast and or the front runner cost you nothing but a couple minutes of your time, but my gosh, they are important. All these things are a vote in favor of what is the next thing I do. The wayward podcast listeners seeing a lot of reviews, the wayward book buyer seeing a lot of reviews, be like, okay, I don't know who Brendan is, but it looks like it's pretty reputable. And here's a new review from Allie257. Titled Reader, Writer, Listener. 5 stars. As a reader and writer, I appreciate Brendan's knowledge and preparedness with his interview subjects. As a listener, I love the candid conversations that unfold. Awesome. Very cool. Thank you very much. I don't read my book ratings and reviews because my negativity bias will force end-of-life ideation. I don't know how many are there on Goodreads or Amazon for the front runner, but I read all the podcast ones. So Howard is the author of The Last Hero, A Life of Henry Aaron, Juicing the Game, Drugs, Power, and the Fight for the Soul of Major League Baseball, Rickey, The Life and Legend of an American Original, The Heritage, Black Athletes, A Divided America, and the Politics of Patriotism and Full Dissidence, Notes from an Uneven Playing Field, and he's also been the guest editor of the Best American Sports Writing Series. He's been on the Sports Reporters on ESPN, commentator elsewhere. He's all over the place. An amazing career, an amazing writer, and a great dude. You're in for a treat. You can learn more about Howard at howardbryant.net and follow him on Instagram at howardbryantbooks. In this episode, we talk about, when do you know it's a book? Who are your stars? How he reshaped the book by fixing the introduction. how he bridged the gap between Robinson and Robeson's timelines, how Branch Rickey, this vaunted angel of integration, wasn't exactly as holy as the narrative would suggest, and Howard's favorite thing about writing, among other great stuff. Awesome stuff. Parting shot on the author's responsibility. I think it's high time we get on with it, CNFers. Cue up the montage. Huh.
Comparison is the thief of joy, obviously.
And like he taught me how to throw a punch.
That's kind of a big deal.
Let me tell you a story, and I forgot to press record.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
So even just the last couple days, I've been watching Masterclass of the Duffer Brothers, the Stranger Things creators, and just I love listening to how like other creative people talk through story and how they outline things, how they go about the work in their way, even if it's not in my sandbox, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's been really cool. And I just wonder, for you, Howard, just this could be a really good on-ramp, is just, looking at those other creative media that maybe you like pluck from, like that helps the biography you write and the other narrative stuff you write.
Well, for me, it's always story. And I had to learn that. I mean, as a journalist, the first thing you are taught is the information. Mm-hmm. What's the information? Who, what, when, where, why? That's the stuff that we know. But then when you write books, you also realize that, story or information without character is not a book. It's not a narrative. Yeah. You got to have characters. You have to have people that you are trying to tell this story through. Who are you following? Who are we listening to? Who do we care about? Why do we care about them? What is their significance? It can't just be information. Otherwise, it's a textbook. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I really, really try to get better at every single book. It's that narrative storytelling, that real narrative heft. Because it runs counter to what I do for a living. When you're a columnist, when you're writing, you don't have time to get into that kind of depth. You don't have, you talk about an issue, you sort of skim over the issue. It's a lot of flyover, a lot of polemic. And when you really get into a really, really, really good book, you stay, and I refer to it as, and my friends don't always understand what I say, but I think, I try to get there with them. You try to stay in narrative. Mm-hmm. Stay in the narrative. If the story is about 1949, stay in 1949. Don't bring me back to 2025 or don't time travel too much. Really get into the grist of what that time was. And the guys who really did it well, I was actually really, really honored. Two of my all-time favorites, David Marinus and Adam Hochschild, they're so good at this. It's like when I was covering baseball and there were guys, who wore the uniform, and then there was Barry Bonds. And even the guys in the uniform would go, we don't do what he does, right? And so there are so many really, really great storytellers. And I hate that term because it feels like it's fiction. It feels like it's make-believe. It's not storytelling. Our stories that we tell are true. But there is a craft to it. And there is a way to really dig into the narrative, stay in the narrative. And when you are able to do that, the material is so rich, and that's what you're really trying to hit.
Yeah, when I interviewed David Gran most recently, a couple years ago, about The Wager and how he creates tension and suspense in nonfiction when we kind of know the outcome, and yet we're still very gripped. He's like, well, those characters in those moments didn't know the outcome. That's right. And so you're staying with, and to your point of staying, if you're in 1949, stay in 1949, stay with them. Where's their head at? You always hear like Vince Gilligan talking about Breaking Bad. He was like, where's Walt's head at? Where's Walt's head at? Yeah. And that's
I disagree
how you
with that. Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I mean, I disagree with, not with you, Brendan, but the idea that we already know the outcome, because if there's one thing that I struggle with deeply, it's whenever you take on a subject, and you do this, you and I do the same thing. how much do they know, right? I mean, you're the expert. You're the one who's immersed in this story. You're the one who knows that Jackie Robinson testified against Paul Robeson in July of 1949. And when I told people what I was working on the last several years, they're like, I never knew that, right? I didn't hear that. I never, and in some ways you're like, well, where you been? But you also recognize that you have to assume that the reader doesn't know what you know. And this is one of the great challenges when you're writing these books. How much does the public know? How much am I just, going over material that everybody is yawning at because they already know this? Or is this new? Is it new material? And I found in this book specifically, and even when I did the Heritage as well, when we were talking about these different subjects, most people would say, I didn't know that. I think that the process is correct. One, you stay in narrative. If you're Vince Gilligan, yes, you're thinking, okay, why, if Gus Fring could simply recognize that this is business and not personal, he'd still be alive today, right? Stay in that, in his mindset as a character. What is he thinking? He's thinking hatred. He's not thinking long term. He's thinking, I hate this guy. These Salamancas, right? Yeah. And if you're working on this project, you're trying to say, okay, we know that Jackie Robinson is now on a postage stamp. We know that he is legend. We know that he was the first Black player to play in the 20th century, that he broke all of these different barriers. But we don't know is, what was he going through in 1945? What was he going through in 1946 and 47? How did he view what he was doing when he didn't know how the story was going to end? And that's one of my favorite parts of the book, actually, is the recognition in 1949, right before he testifies against Robeson, before the anti-communist Branch Rickey and the anti-communist forces come after him and say, look, we need you to do this, for the sake of keeping America wholesome and healthy and the whole thing, right? They lay it on him pretty thick. He's incredibly disillusioned that in 1949, he's in his 5th year in organized baseball. He signed in October 1945. So it's not just the fact that that he had integrated the game in April of 47. He'd been signed in October of 45. So the door was open in October of 45 for other teams to come along and say, okay, Branch Rickey did this. Now we can do it too. And they didn't. On opening day, 1949, there were 7 Black players in baseball, in the whole damn sport. And 3 of them played for the Dodgers, yeah. And the other 2 played, and 2 more played for Cleveland. So that gives you that 5 of the 7 Black players in the whole sport played for 2 teams. What does that do to our narrative? And one of the reasons why I did this book in the first place was I was really, really just tired of this narrative that on April 15th, 1947, everything was fine. That Jackie Robinson showed up and then the world accepted him and baseball accepted him and there was a whole new day. That is not the case. The story of this is that Jackie Robinson came in with all of the anticipation that he was breaking ground and that he was doing what the country asked him to do and that he did put himself in as a pioneering figure. And by the end of his life was as disillusioned with this country as he'd ever been. That is a different story than we think we know about Jackie Robinson.
Mm. Yeah, and when you're looking to take on a book project, or be it whatever ideas you're coming up with, when do you know that there's kind of enough meat on the bone there for you to...
When do you know it's a book?
When do you know it's a book?
Yeah, well, you and I did this a few years ago, and I don't want to repeat myself and bore you to tears on it, but I have my 5 steps of anxiety when I work on a book. Step 1 is, do I have an idea? That's the very first thing. That is the question that you're asking. Okay, is it a book? Is it a magazine piece? Is it a newspaper article? Is it a podcast? Is it a document? What is it? What do we have here? This book, I knew was a book. I knew it was a book because of 3 specific things. 1, the introduction of the Heritage, which I wrote in 2018, all about the Black protest and the revival of the Black political athlete. The introduction of that is Robeson in court, not in court, but in front of HUAC in 1956. So while I was working on the Heritage, I'm sitting here deciding what the intro of that book is going to be, and it's Robeson. And while I'm digging in on this, and while I'm working on this intro, I'm like, wait a minute, there's enough here for its own book. And I began to think more and more and more. I have been covering this sport for 30 something years. I went to college in Philadelphia. And when I got to Temple University in 1987, Paul Robeson had only been dead a decade. He died in 76. So his aura was still around the city, especially in the black parts of the city. And I knew, because I'd read everything I could about Jackie Robinson, and I'm such a huge Jackie Robinson fan, I knew that he had testified against Robeson in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. And then I turned the page like everybody else. That's kind of a big deal, right? It's like, what did they tell us in J school? If it's not supposed to be there, it's news, right? Yeah. I mean, and I was sort of mad at myself at the number of times I had written that sentence. So not only did Jackie testify against Paul, but he knew it was wrong by the end. He didn't really want to admit it was wrong. He had been criticized by the black community for doing it. Malcolm X went after him. Those two went at it in the early 60s. And I'd never put two and two together to say, let's just stop and focus in on this relationship. What happened? What happened? And finally, when I was done with the Rickey Henderson book in 2022, I was like, this is the book I'm doing next. It was just so obvious. The question was step 2 of the anxiety, which is, okay, how do I get it? You've got the idea. How do you get it? And Paul Robeson is a legendary, gigantic figure, and nobody knows who he is. And so I've been thinking, okay, well, how do you get this book? Like, where, is the archival available? What's the material? There's plenty of material. Where is it? How do you get it? But on top of that, how do you tell this story? Because these two guys are not of the same generation. Robeson is 21 years older than Jackie Robinson. So what is the construction going to be? How do you want to get this book? So I knew it was a book from pretty much from day one. The bigger question for me was, how do you get it? How do you construct this narrative? Do you have the chops to construct this narrative? Can you do it the way you want to do it? And so I had felt like the real way to do it, especially when I had recognized that these two guys had never met, which is incredible, which is impossible. You've got Jackie and you've got Paul, and they're both in Harlem at the same time. And the black community is very, very small, right? I mean, everybody in Harlem knows each other, especially when you're at that celebrity level. They all know each other. These two guys had never met. They're 20 years apart. One essentially replaces the other as the most famous black American in the country. And they're placed in this adversarial position. So I decided I'm just going to do it doing a construction that I had never done before, which was alternating chapters. And I know that gets a little dicey because you're doing time travel and you don't want to overlap. But I really did feel like it was metaphorically a great way to approach it because these two guys had never met. And the only way that they had overlapped was when you're talking about something political that ended up disillusioning both of them.
Yeah, I love it. Was really masterful in how you braid their stories together because they had never met, and yet were somehow in direct opposition to one another. But the way you write it, it does, even though they never come into contact, it does feel like they are in that constant conflict with each other throughout this Red Scare and the second Red Scare.
Well, that's right. And so what do you do? So what were we just talking about? We're talking about characters. And it was the thing that I had learned most with my first book, Shutout, which was, once again, information does not sell books. Ideas don't sell books. Characters sell books. Characters make books. And we're talking about who, what, when, where, like how. Why are these guys in opposition? And were they actually really in opposition? How can you be in opposition with someone you never met? How can you be in opposition with somebody who's essentially sharing the same plight you're sharing in the country? Why are you in opposition? And that brings in the other character. It's Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey is the puppet master of this entire book. Branch Rickey is the puppet master of that entire period. Branch Rickey is the guy who is credited, and rightfully, with the integration of Major League Baseball. But Branch Rickey also did not do this by himself, and yet it's fascinating to me that Rickey is one of the historic figures, who essentially was so powerful. And I think that the story was so palatable to American ears American ears that don't want to hear about racism. They don't want to hear all this about how hard things are. They want heroes. Okay, tell us what made us better. And Rickey has essentially never had his narrative challenged. Like every story we know about integration in baseball pretty much comes from Branch Rickey's version until now. And you start to realize as you dig into the research that Jackie didn't even want to do this. He didn't want to testify against. Why would you testify? Why would you want to testify against one of the most famous Black people in the country? You're not even a political person. Jackie has his political thoughts. He's a citizen. But this is really the first time that he is voicing his opinions on an American political issue. Why would he do that? He did it out of a responsibility to Branch Rickey. He felt he owed his life to Branch Rickey. He felt he owed everything he had to Branch Rickey, not just personally, but Branch Rickey was the one white man who said, yeah, you deserve to play. Nobody else was doing it. And so Rickey, I don't think he forced him, but he pretty much told him that this is something you have to do. And Robinson did it. He was reluctant to do it. His whole life changed in a lot of ways. Robeson's life changed in some ways. But when you're really thinking about tying these stories together, the common thread is not communist versus anti-communist. It's Branch Rickey.
The grayness of Rickey's character, because the one we are fed over years is he was this great, even said like great emancipator in baseball. But he was thinking of integrating the sport, but it wasn't necessarily Black American players. He had his eye on Latin America.
He wanted nothing. Branch Rickey, let's just be very clear about this, wanted nothing to do with desegregation. And this is going to sound very strange, but people, it's the both things can be true conversation. When you go back and read the history of the anti-slavery movement, there were plenty of people who were abolitionists. That didn't mean they liked Black people. That didn't mean they felt Black people were equal or that they should share schools and housing and marriage and the rest of it with them. It meant that this institution needs to go. And Rickey was of that persuasion. Rickey was of the persuasion that everybody should have a right to play baseball. That didn't mean that he wanted to upend the Jim Crow segregated nature of the United States. His attitude was, okay, let's open the doors. And he scouted in Latin America, and he spent $25,000 looking for players outside of the United States. And his plan was that these players could come and play, and then they'd go home. They'd go back to their own countries in the off season. That the American racial order would not be challenged. You would essentially have, ironically, what you have right now, which is Major League Baseball is a white, suburban American sport that is reinforced by foreign labor. Everybody else down there is Dominican, Venezuelan, Cuban, right? So that's really what baseball looks like right now. So the Branch Rickey prophecy, the actual legacy of Branch Rickey, it actually happened. It just happened a lot later. It wasn't until he recognized that, the best Black players are actually in the Negro Leagues. He wanted nothing to do with the Negro Leagues. He had no respect for the Negro Leagues. He knew the price that was going to be paid by bringing in Black players would have been all kinds of problems. And so the only reason that he got moved toward having to go and deal with Negro League players and signing Jackie Robinson was because he also wanted the best players. And the best players happened to be American. And that is a narrative that never gets discussed. That here's a guy, it's a lot like Levittown. World War II, the Levittowns in New York and Pennsylvania, it's a housing issue. But those Levittowns were segregated. So there are a lot of people who wanted to solve one issue while avoiding another. And it doesn't change. And that was one of the questions in the book for me was, okay, is Branch Rickey a villain? Does that make him a villain? Yes and no. I mean, sure. Is it as tied up in a pretty bow and heroic as we thought it was? No. But the bottom line is that Branch Rickey did break the line. Branch Rickey did bring in Jackie Robinson, and Branch Rickey did put Jackie Robinson on the field. And the piece of it that I think is really, really compelling and unknown to a lot of people is how much they hated him for that. The rest of the baseball owners felt that Branch Rickey had betrayed them to the highest order, that it was the greatest betrayal when he did this. It was not a heroic moment. It was not a happy moment. There was only one other person who congratulated him, and it was Horace Stoneham of the Giants. Nobody else wanted this. So it makes it complicated. You give Rickey credit for what he did, but you don't give him credit for something that happened sort of, I guess, by accident. If he had had his way, they would have signed a Mexican player or a Cuban player or a Dominican player, and this story wouldn't have been what it became.
Mm. Yeah, and I love the title of the book as well. There's this nod to the bigger chess game that's going on globally, but also here are these two kings in Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson, but who are also pawned by other people. And here are these things like on a chessboard is like a note I made in my little book report in my other journal. Was just like, here are these, it's like the kings get to the other side of the board and they get turned into pawns instead of pawns becoming kings.
Instead
it's
of the
like
reverse.
It's really
That's
reverse
right.
how they get used, and then their careers. In the case of Paul Robeson, was his life was ruined, his career was ruined as a result of all of this.
Oh, that's right. Well, and his life was already in the process of being ruined. I think that, and that's one of the things that I wanted to be very sort of clear about, was Jackie Robinson did not destroy Paul Robeson's career. Jackie sort of gave it the final push because of the violence that came afterwards and the mobilization that came after and the political utility. He served the political utility of having one black person criticize another. There's a lot of utility in that. There was a lot of utility in it back then. There's a lot of utility in it today. I always say the black person out there who is willing to criticize prominent black people will have a job for life, because now you can't say it's racial. You can't say we're piling on, and you can't say, you can say, hey, look, this person feels the same way we do. And there are plenty of black people out there who have played that role. And that's not a role that Jackie Robinson played very often. And that was one of the things in the title of the book. I mean, the title of the book comes from the fact that I love chess. I'm a chess player. And the metaphors just kept working. That was the problem. And actually the problem was a good problem. It's like, and when people would talk to me about the title of the book, the first thing, depending on who they were partisan-wise, if they were Robeson people, they'd be like, okay, who's the pawn? Is Jackie the pawn? Is Robeson the pawn? And to me, the battle of it all was that we all are. Is that on the one hand, the Robeson people felt that Jackie was allowing himself to be used by this notoriously really heinous committee. I mean, the House Un-American Activities Committee is one of the most notorious government bodies in the history of this country. And Jackie was allowing himself to appear on behalf of it, on behalf of right-wing segregationists that wouldn't shake his hand. They didn't want him to be equal, but there he was. And then, of course, as we've all, depending on when you were born, the Cold War, why is Robeson supporting the Soviet Union? Why is he they figured he was the one spouting Russian propaganda. Sounds kind of interesting today. And then, of course, you had some other of the more radical black voices like a Malcolm X, who felt like the real pawn was the NAACP and felt like it was the black organizations who continued to believe that this country was going to give you your rights. If you enlisted in World War I or World War II, then you would prove that you were American. If you testified on behalf of American values, then people were going to view you as American. And it never happened. I mean, the violence toward black soldiers was at its highest when black soldiers came home from fighting for their country. And the question has always been, what does it take to be American? So a lot of this book was about strategy as well. It was about, do you decide to take on this role? And Jackie took on the role because he believed, as Rachel Robinson says in the book, Jackie was one of, my country, right or wrong. I have a piece of this, whether you whether you're the Ku Klux Klan or whether you discriminate against me or whether or not you don't want me to play Major League Baseball, I am an American and I have a right to this. And then there are the other people who would say, well, no, you allowed yourself to be used, so no matter what you believed, this didn't work. It didn't work the way you wanted it to work. Hence the disillusionment later. Yeah. So I thought there was a lot there. There was a lot to think about. There was a lot to talk about. I start the book. In fact, if you're looking at the galley, I kind of rewrote a lot of it. The galley's not really what all the book is about anymore. Oh. But it really is about that W.E.B. Du Bois question of two-ness. Can you be an American if you're Black and also still support the country, knowing full well that you're a second-class citizen, that you live in Jim Crow segregation? Can you still say that you are a full-blooded citizen when your own country is telling you that you're not?
Yeah. Yeah, and really what sets a lot of this in motion is when Robison's in Paris and he accepts this award, and he says, it's unthinkable that the American Negro would go to war on behalf of those who have oppressed us for generations against a country which in one generation has raised our people to the full dignity of mankind. And he's talking about the Soviet Union there, and that essentially blows this all up. That's kind of like our inciting incident, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also very interesting, too, when you think about the history of it, when people wonder whatever happened to Paul Robeson. It's not just what happened to him. It's also what happened to that movement. There was in the 1920s and the 1930s. I mean, there was a movement there to try to find a place where where segregation was not going to be the defining characteristic of your life for African Americans. You see it in the Great Migration. And because of Cold War politics and because of how we've treated communism and because of who gets to tell the story and what stories get told, this sort of expat movement to the Soviet Union gets cut out of the Great Migration. It's the same principle. Where can I go and not be lynched? Where can I go to have a life? Of course it's attractive. Of course, it's something that you would consider. Why did you leave the South in the first place? Why did the people in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, why did they go to New York and Boston and Chicago and Detroit and LA and Oakland? To get away from, this sort of oppressive, this oppressive lifestyle. And a lot of people also went to Russia, very small number, but a lot of people went. It's not a small percentage, but a big number. And so the idea that Robeson was espousing was not very different. He's an original. And what did Muhammad Ali say about Vietnam? Right? It's the same principle. The same principle is my problem is here, not there.
I love the digression's the wrong word, but maybe the little set piece that you have on Du Bois. Du Bois is throughout the whole book, but then you kind of meditate on him a little bit towards the end of the book and how he's one of those forerunner generations. It seems like every 20 or 25 years, there's another sort of king. Yeah. But he, to your point of the two-ness, before he was leaving for Ghana, he said, he would concede the two-ness of America could not be conquered, writing, I was not an American, I was not a man. I was, by long education and daily reminder, a colored man in a white world. And, that's kind of like that game being played. And then, unfortunately, these powerful Black men being the pawns of the white supremacy.
Well, and it's heartbreaking as well. I mean, when we think about this, when we started this program, we were talking about Rachel Robinson is 103 years old. And it's amazing to me that Jackie died in 1972. She's been alive as a widow longer than Jackie was alive, period.
Yeah. Which
is incredible. And Du Bois was born in 1868, and he dies in 1963 at 95 years old. And you think about all of the figures. He crosses Robert E. Lee. Right? He crosses Trotta, he crosses Frederick Douglass, he crosses Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and Jackie. He's the whole and all of them. He crosses everybody. It's fascinating. And not as a little kid, as an adult. He overlaps with these folks, and he's the true great original Black intellectual when you look at all of the people that he sort of overlapped with. And to me, I think one of the things that really attracted me about this project was the longevity of a lot of these voices and how the voices changed over time. I really, really sort of felt when I was digging into the research and thinking about sort of how to sort of position all of this, was this idea that you are going to fight for a certain set of principles. And when it comes to the African American story, so much of it is always just rooted in the Black story. What happened to Black people at that time? And the thing that made this story so compelling to me was that we never really talk about African Americans in the Cold War. We usually talk about Black issues when they are pertaining specifically to Black people, and everything else sort of goes out the window. And the Cold War is different from that, because you've got so many of these figures who are right in the middle of, whether it's the McCarthy period, whether it's before the McCarthy period, whether it is, how do we deal with a lot of the issues of race and fairness and class, and all of these things are all taking place right during the same period. And I wanted to sort of bring this sort of Black struggle into that tent. And I really thought it was sort of a compelling, approach, simply because we never talk about it that way. We never talk about, what was the Black relationship to the Cold War. They weren't like way over here. Black citizens were right in the middle of it as well.
Yeah, and something that struck me in the book as well that I had never given any thought to was on the African continent, and how Robeson among others was really advocating for the decolonialization of that. But then there's this passage from Kingsolver that you wrote, but we're summing it up, where it was just like the debts for, let's say, World War II were paid off of the basically the raw materials of the African continent. And just thinking of that, of how that's all parceled up, it kind of blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, just the gross exploitation of how the empire was built and everything from World War II on.
Well, that's right. And it sounds familiar. We're fighting over oil in Venezuela right now. I mean, this is what's happening. And I think that what I found fascinating about that is how we're taught about these movements. We're not even paying attention to the fact that it's all happening at the same time. So you've got the civil rights thing taking place post-war in the United States. At the exact same time, you've got the anti-colonial movements taking place in Africa. And all the independence movements are taking place at the same time. And what I thought was fascinating about it was the Cold War elements of it separated these two movements. And that this is the battle. This was the Du Bois battle versus the NAACP battle, which is this idea that there is a Pan-African sensibility, that Black people in the Caribbean have the same racial plight as Black people in the United States, and the same as in Europe, and the same in Asia, the same Black and brown battle. But because of communism, because of anti-communism, because of the Cold War, these two movements are decoupled. And so there's a romantic piece of it that African Americans have had to deal with. There's the romance of what would have happened if King and X and Jackie had lived. These kings, if they had lived, what would those voices be? And then there's the other romance, of what would have happened had Black leadership in the United States not succumbed to a lot of the red baiting and the Red Scare and the whole thing of running, because a lot of the economic questions that we're seeing today were being battled back then, in terms of, can you, as a minority, build wealth in this country? Do you need the Mamdani version of democratic socialism in this country? How do you get through? And there was a huge, huge, huge thought, a huge group of thought that believed that you needed a real sort of economic change. And then, of course, when all of this, when the United States and the Soviet Union become so adversarial, people just ran for cover. Like that battle, are you going to win that battle? You can't win that battle. And that was the NAACP's position, which was, hey, we're trying to build our country here. We're trying to get a place where we can actually succeed here. And adding Cold War politics to it and being in opposition to the State Department and not, and being on the opposite side of the common, thought in the country, it's going nowhere. It's just not going to work. And so I really appreciated that sort of battle between whether or not it was even possible to couple the African and African American struggles together when you add Cold War politics to it.
When you're like sitting down to write and you get your materials, together, I just curiously thinking like how when do you know you're ready to start writing? When do you know you have enough raw material to at least get that momentum going?
Well, it depends on how everybody works. And I have decided, I think that, should I be fortunate enough to work on another book, I'm going to do a lot more before I put anything on paper. A lot of times I put things on paper so I have at least some sort of structure of where I want to go, because there's so much material. And the more you dig, the more the material changes and the more the focus changes. And I know some people that don't write. I know some writers don't write anything until they feel like they've got a majority of the material, until they've got their structure down. I know there are some people like myself where I try to outline heavily. I don't write a lot of chapters. I outline heavily in terms of like what are the focus points. And a lot of times I end up, when I start writing, a lot of times I'll write the end of some chapters before. I'll write those first. So I give myself an idea of where this thing is heading, just to create some boundaries, because it can be so overwhelming. To me, there's no answer to that question. But in my case, I always try to write what I know first and try to get that down as much as possible, because then everything will then build from it. But I think that I do think that now some of these ideas are becoming so difficult and so complex. You have to really, I may even go, I don't think I would ever write once I had all the material, but I think I'm going to be doing a lot more research before I put anything in paragraph form.
Yeah, it's kind of, maybe with Kings and Pawns, and maybe the shape of it felt evident early on, but when does the shape typically start to reveal itself to you? Kind of like a Polaroid coming into focus.
I think it starts to come into focus when you realize who your stars, and then you start to connecting those dots. I think once I realized that it wasn't just Jackie and Paul, it was Jackie, Paul, and Ricky. Mm-hmm. Now it's starting to look like something. Yeah. Okay, now we've got characters. I think that was the first thing. I think the second thing was, and maybe this is actually the first thing, is what are the bookends? Like, okay, where are we going? Okay, we know Paul Robeson was born in 1898. We know Jackie Robinson was born in 1919. We know that Jackie died in 72. We know Robeson died in 76. Okay, but we also know that Rachel is still alive, and we know that Jackie had a bit of a renaissance in the 80s and the 90s because of Rachel. So what are the bookends? Do we end this book at Robeson's death? Like, so that's also part of it when it starts to come into focus, is you do need those, you need those guardrails. Otherwise it just goes, it's my favorite thing about books is that unlike writing a magazine piece, you can take these tributaries and, write a couple of pages on somebody else. You can do that, which is what I did with Du Bois. And in one of the later chapters in Ruth Shipley, one of the most notorious human beings that no one had ever heard of, this person who controlled the passports by herself, pretty much. She got to control who got to travel and who didn't. And so I think it starts to come into focus when you realize who you're focusing on, like what needs to be focused on. And I think one of the last things that I did focus on, and why I did so much rewriting on this, was the recognition of, you sort of step back, and as we were talking about earlier, what do people know? I think it's very, very clear. It was very clear to me that the book wasn't scary enough, that people just don't understand what the Red Scare really was, like what it was doing to people, what this country was doing to people. And yet the parallels to today, pulling people off of the street, it's not very different than ruining their careers because your next door neighbor said, "Oh, I saw Brendan at a Communist Party meeting." Your life's over. You get fired from your job. Your kids are ostracized. I mean, like, this is a real period. And today, I don't think we have any idea of that. So I also realized, I'm like, okay, you need to really dig in and emphasize what this meant, that the United States was not allowing people to travel if it disagreed with your political views. That, oh, you're a Democrat. We're not going to allow you to take a trip to Spain. We're not going to allow you to take your family to Jamaica. We're not going to issue you a passport because we have decided who gets to travel and who doesn't based on what you think about the world. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah. Well, Robeson couldn't even go to Canada when you didn't need a passport.
He couldn't go to Hawaii. I mean, that's insane, right? He couldn't go to he couldn't go to Guam. He couldn't go anywhere. He was under house arrest. And so to me, what was the way? How do you convey that in a way that people will go, holy shit, right? Like in Adam Hochschild's book, American Midnight, the same thing was happening in the first Red Scare in World War I. And you're going, wow, this is not democratic, but you had to convey that. And so one of the areas that I used was Robeson's occupations anyway, which is the theater and acting and how, what was happening in Hollywood and all of that people's careers and their lives were being absolutely destroyed. On college campuses, they were being destroyed. Sounds familiar. The list of professors who were considered communist. Albert Einstein was considered anti-American, right? The number of people who were tainted with this accusation. And so much of it also came through the popular culture. Like we see it today. You watch The Twilight Zone, or you watch Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or you watch all of these old movies. The metaphor, the Manchurian Candidate, the metaphor for all of these things is anti-communism, that your next door neighbor is not who they say they are. It's this paranoid, this creation, this subtext of paranoia that has real life consequences. It's not just that the guy down the street is crazy. It's that we think the guy down the street is anti-American. He disagrees with us, and we're going to take his livelihood. That had to come through in the book, and that Paul Robeson's life was destroyed by this, that they were literally, trying to kill him three ways. First, they killed his career, right? Then they killed his reputation. Then they literally tried to kill him in Peekskill. Yeah. And so that this country, and you look at the cover of the book, you see the Peekskill ride at the bottom, the photo on the cover is this, that these are supposedly your countrymen. These are citizens, and they are empowered to really impose physical violence on a group of people that are being called un-American. And the parallels to today are just obvious.
Yeah. Well, and you were talking about the rewriting a moment ago. And when I was doing the front runner, I went through so many rewrites to get it readable and everything. And what was that process like for you? With this book, just the laborious reshaping and rewriting to make it, as wonderful as it is.
Well, it was construction. The construction was a beast. It was very, very difficult because of the age difference. So by the time Jackie Robinson was in diapers, Paul Robeson was already a legend. So how do you get these two guys on the same page? Yeah. And so if you do it chronologically, Jackie Robinson's not even going to be announced until you're you're a third of the way through the book. And so the first iteration did some jumping back and forth for that reason. But then it just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel right. The book felt disjointed because you couldn't get these two stories even because of the 20-year time difference. And because Robeson was such a huge, huge figure when Jackie Robinson wasn't even alive. So it's like, okay, did I really mess this up? Are these two different books? Are these two separate books? What is the common thread to pull them together? So one of the ways that I felt like doing it was that I was like, ultimately, which is why the galley copy you have is not the same, is I just rewrote the intro. I was like, okay, so let's just introduce Jackie Robinson and who Jackie was and where Jackie was at his moment of peak, which is the winter after he testifies against Robeson he is considered an American hero. This is the highlight of his life. He wins the MVP that year. The Dodgers lost the World Series, but he won the pennant again. They made the World Series, and he is being lauded across the country and celebrated across the country as a true American hero. And that was the way to introduce. So at least you begin the book with the two, and then chapter 1 begins with Robeson. So now you've got them at least on the same page. And so the first two things you're reading in the book have both of these guys in real time. That was the big thing. Also, the original conceit of the book was to just tell the story of what happened in July of 49 when Jackie testified and said, that it sounds silly to me that Robeson would say these things if he said those things, etc. But that's not it, because Robeson has his rebuttal 7 years later. So I'm realizing that the construction that I created in this book was, we're going to do this thing about this moment in history that nobody knows. It's actually two moments in history. It's when Robinson testifies in front of HUAC, and then Robeson testifies in 56, when he says, that my father was a slave and he was born here and I own a piece of this. Just like Jackie, I own a piece of this, and no one's going to take my country away from me. And so now the whole idea has shifted from this one moment to these two pivot moments. And so the whole sort of purpose of writing this, or not the purpose, the aim then, is, okay, you've got one guy who was once the most famous Black person in the world. And now you have another guy who is now the most famous Black person in the world. They're pitted against each other for reasons that aren't going to satisfy either one of them. You've got to give them both their moment. You've got to give them both their apex. And then you've got to be able to tie them at the end into this moment of disillusionment. And it goes back to the title. So by the time they're both finished, what got accomplished? I love the fact that Robeson maintained his principles. I love that. And I felt like that he was able to maintain his dignity, but let us not underestimate at all what this country did to him, that the price for that is enormous. And also the legacy of it, by the time that Robeson passes away in years, Jackie, it's amazing that Jackie is 20 years younger than Robeson, but outlives him by 4 years. That Rachel really knew that this is the definition of legacy. When Rachel says there were two things that haunted us that we never got past. One was Jackie campaigning and supporting Richard Nixon in 1960, which people still talk about. Well, Jackie Robinson was a Republican. Yeah, exactly. That outlived him. It has outlived him. And the other is the testimony against Paul Robeson. And she said, we got bad advice. She's talking about Branch Rickey. Mm-hmm. I think we got bad advice. And I think that's just a fantastic way of saying it without saying it. Mm-hmm. Because Jackie was so loyal to Rickey, and Rachel was loyal. They all understood their moment in history. But on this particular point, it did not serve Jackie very well. Mm.
Over the course of your extensive research and the writing, did your impressions or your opinions change one way or the other for Jackie and Paul at the center of the story?
Well, there's the four pieces, right? There's Jackie, there's Paul, there's Rickey, and there's also the Black establishment. I found myself enraged at some moments by the NAACP and by the Black leadership. But I also understood, and that's what I mean about does it come off, just how disqualifying it was to associate with communism. At one point, it was fashionable, in the 20s and the 30s, as you see if you watch Oppenheimer or any of these movies. At some point, it was, or if you read that history, and then post World War II, the United States and Russia are building a nuclear superpower rivalry. It's untenable. And so while I'm doing the research, there's a part of me that is just saying that, you're thinking to yourself, was there another way? Was there, why did the NAACP feel like it needed to go after Robeson the way that it did? with the venom that it did. It could have just stayed quiet. But that wasn't necessarily an option when you have all of your allies in government telling you, we need you to do this. We need you to denounce this man publicly. And they didn't do that. So I think that, yeah, the thing that I was really wrestling with throughout it was to get away from the good guy, bad guy narratives and say, this is very complicated for everybody. Everybody has got to sort of find their peace with this. I never got to that point, though, because I still, there is that part of me, if you like watch, if you read the history, you read the history of Ghana, you read the history of Kenya and all of those, and all of those movements in the 50s that changed the world, that changed the map. Look at a map of the world in 1945 and look at a map in 1962. All of those colonial uprisings, what would they have been had the Black leadership coupled those movements to our movement here? If the civil rights movement was actually a world movement, because all of those world civil rights actions were taking place. That piece of it was really sort of the growth for me. That was the piece that I came out of it feeling like I could write another 200 pages on this. And the focus of the book was on these two guys in this little moment in time, but that is a great, great history.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing book, Howard, and I'm so glad that we got to talk about it. I got to read it and everything, get to celebrate it, and as we bring these conversations down for a landing, I always just love asking the guest, you in this case, just for a recommendation of some kind. That's just anything that's kind of making you happy that you want to recommend to the listeners out there. It could be.
Well, there are two books out there. Well, I'm no fun. I want to be fun. I want people to think that I'm fun. I think I'm fun, but I don't write about fun stuff. And so because I never write about fun stuff, I have to sort of lean into that. It's like people ask me, like I never really read nonfiction when I'm writing. I only read fiction when I'm writing a book because I don't want to, by osmosis, adapt somebody else's style, somebody else's material. You don't want to read that because then someone's going to come after you and say, oh, that was my paragraph and whatever. So I only focus on the research when I'm working on the book, and then I read fiction when I'm not, when I'm in the middle of a book project. However, there are two books that I just think are just brilliant about where we are. One is the Sven Eckert book, Empire of Cotton, which is unbelievable. I'm like, okay, how does it again, we both write. I don't do what he does. Like, that's an incredible, incredible book, Empire of Cotton. The other one is American Midnight by Adam Hochschild. It is just tremendous. Those two books are really, really fantastic. I got to give my man Wright Thompson a shout out because he's the one who said, you got to read Empire of Cotton. Mm-hmm. But I'm a movie guy. And so I love, love, love movies. And so I'm reading For Keeps, which is this like 1,500 page compilation of all of Pauline Kael's New Yorker movie reviews. And that's been so much fun. I've really, really enjoyed that. So I do get to have fun.
Oh, fantastic. Well, it was such a joy to talk to you, Howard, about your work, and I just appreciate you carving out the time to talk about the book and talk some shop. So just, as always.
Thank you for having me. I love your podcast. I love the fact that we get to talk about these things. People, whenever I go do a book event, this type of podcast is really what people want to talk about. They want to talk about process. I say this all the time. There's an artist in everybody. There's a writer in everybody. People want to... They love stories. They like to hear stories. They like to tell stories. They want to tell their own story. And they really, really do love hearing about the process of making something happen. One of the things that I always say about writing is my favorite thing about writing is that you start with a blinking cursor, you start with a blank page, and it goes from nothing to something. And there aren't two people who would take on the same subject and end up with the same material and produce the same thing.
Yeah, and it's an ugly process by and large. No matter how skilled you are, it's messy, and it's good for people to hear that. Well, no matter your skill level.
But I love it, and I tell people all the time that there's only one difference between us who get to call ourselves authors and them who can't, who say, I got a book in me and I just can't get it out. I got it right here and I can't. There's only one difference. And the difference is that you went through the ugly, you went through the process, and you finished, and you hit send, and it's done. It's the only difference. Finish your book.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Howard, this is, as I said, wonderful to get to talk shop with you. So thanks again for your time.
Oh, my pleasure, Brendan. Call anytime.
Yes. Awesome. Pretty great, right? Thanks to Howard for coming back on the show. Need to do a non-book promo pod with him where we just riff on writing and biography and stuff like that. I think that'd be really fun. I think he would really like that. I get the impression that he would find that pretty fun. Don't forget to hit up the club. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com, okay? And follow the show at Creative Nonfiction Podcast on Instagram. Blah. I can't say that without... All right, so I've riffed on this one in one form or another before, this idea of the author's responsibility in book promotion and marketing. I think it bears repeating. I was on a panel of some kind last year, and one author, I've talked about this before, but I'm just going to bring it up again. And speaking to an audience of mostly wannabe authors, said something to the effect that it's not their job to promote their books, it's to write them. And this is malpractice. I'm here to argue that it's really no longer even your publisher's job to do that. Even though they technically have a marketing department, it's basically that in name only. Your expectations, no matter the size of the publisher, should be extremely low. They're well-intentioned and by and large very sweet, and maybe they leverage a little bit of their weight for you, but make no mistake, 99% of the work is on your shoulders. It just is. And if you're starting your marketing work when you turn in your final draft 5 or 6 months before your publication date, sorry to say, you are way too late. Now, for my next book, assuming I can snag a book deal, is in the baseball world. And the moment that book contract is signed, and let's say I've got a 3 or 4 year runway between when it's signed and published, I'll be not only starting my research and reporting on day one of that signature, I'll be building a database of book-related media. I'll probably build that into my day, just like do a half an hour of it every day, listing some people out, and then I'll be spending time making contacts in the world where my book will live in. I'm just going to target that audience, find the Substacks, find the newsletters, the podcasts, and make my appearance and my pitch in their world as seamless as possible. Plus, you got to spend a little time listening or reading what they do. I hate few things more than getting pitches from authors and publicists who so clearly have never listened to the podcast, who so clearly haven't even read the description of the podcast. I mean, it's maddening. I get some of the pitches I get. It's like, wow, a novel. I don't have novelists on the show. It's right in the show. It's right in the title. But George Saunders, if you want to come on the show, please come on the show. The mistake I made with the front runner was not making more inroads with running groups and podcasts and influencer types and substackers and newsletterers. I also put a little too much trust in my PR team, nice as they were. I deep down, like way deep, I knew better. I should have known better, and I did know better. And yet there was a part of me that hung on to this hope that maybe they would take on a little more. Or maybe I felt that their efforts would prove more fruitful than my own efforts. And it was totally the opposite. It was when I started doing things that things started to happen. That's when momentum happened. If I can even call whatever happened over the summer momentum. I don't know. I kind of blacked out the whole summer. That's no knock on them. That's my grave miscalculation of book promotion now. Yeah, it's all the author's responsibility. Build it into the budget, your time budget, your money budget. I'd say only do in-person events in towns and cities where you have a robust interpersonal network to put butts in seats. Otherwise, you're in for a disappointment. Several disappointments. Let me count the disappointments. But you also don't want to be one of those authors who's like constantly posting and newslettering to the point of spamming, really. On some level, a part of your own book promotion is lifting up other people. It's going to events in person. That's tough, I understand, but it's part of the deal. Attending virtual events. You have to put your skin on the line. You have to buy the books. You have to buy multiple books, give some away. You have to blog about books, and really, 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 you got to leave ratings and reviews. If you've benefited from a rating or review as a consumer or as an artist, you just need to be leaving these things. Build a habit. 1 or 2 sentences, boom, 4 or 5 stars, boom, done. If you one day want to ask for them, you got to give them on the reg. I see too many authors trying to steal all the attention. I don't see them returning the favor. And maybe they are, but I don't see it. And I'm kind of plugged into it a lot. I'm always paying a lot of attention to what people are doing, and especially what people are not doing. I see them get exhausted from sharing their own work, then saying, I need to peace out for a while. Okay, yes, rest for a bit, but don't reappear only when you have something to sell or a story to promote. Seth Wickersham's really good at this. He's always promoting like his friends and people, books he's blurbed, or just people in his network. That's what the good guys do. Of course, he was hustling the shit out of American Kings, but when he's got a friend with a book coming out, he's sharing it to his Instagram stories. He's taking part. Like how easy is that, right? And it means a lot. I think you curry a lot of good favor by doing that. I don't think anybody is doing this particularly well, by and large. I mean, I just mentioned Seth is doing that well, but in the totality of it all, I'm not so sure people are doing it well. But I think it's because a lot of us don't want to do it, and so we do the bare minimum, or we do too much, and we're still all trying to get a feel for it. And I don't know if there's a perfect example or even a good example out there, because few of us were trained to be marketers. We want to be artists and leave it at that. Put a fork in that era, man. That's over. Maybe we'll win the lottery and be one of those anointed unicorn writers who has like an army of people making them a star. But for the rest of us, save yourself the frustration and find a way to get good at it. In the same way you've gotten good at your craft. You got to build that into your toolbox. We need to get excited for the selling and the promotion in the same way we might get excited to start a new book. It's a skill. It's a new hat. It's a different kind of costume, and you can get better at it. I just think that the sooner we get it out of our minds that we'll have help selling the thing and realize that it's on us and our networks and our communities 99% of the way, that it's on us 99% of the way, the more we can surrender to that certainty and accept it as part of the totality of the job, the less jaded we'll feel about it. And maybe the more energized we'll feel about it and kind of look forward to it, because that interest and that energy is infectious. I could say more, and maybe I already said too much on the topic, but it's something that's always front of mind for me and will no doubt come up again. So stay wild, CNFers, and if you can't do, interview. See ya.